Midway USA has an extensive selection of bullets, providing top-notch performance and accuracy for the cartridge you plan on reloading. If you plan to hunt, shoot competitively, plink at the range, or even load up some self-defense rounds, Midway USA has the popular brands, calibers, diameters, and grain weights of bullets you are searching for. First-time reloaders, bulk bullet buyers, and seasoned specialty shooters begin their search for bullets at Midway USA. For just about everything for reloading, shop MidwayUSA.com.
At Midway USA, we put customers first. The Nitro Express shipping system is icing on the cake. It was a big investment of time and money to take super fast, low-cost shipping to a whole new level. The Nitro Express helps ensure same-day shipping and low shipping cost. We hope you enjoy the Nitro Express. We built it just for you. For just about everything for the outdoors, go to MidwayUSA.com.
I'm Larry Potterfield with Midway USA. Thanks for your business.
Hunting is not easy. It never has been. It takes dedication, motivation, a lot of patience, and quality gear. If you manage a food plot, put up stands, or need just one more game camera, we can help at MidwayUSA.com. We opened our doors in 1977 and continue to put customers first by offering super fast, same-day shipping. For just about everything for the outdoors, go to MidwayUSA.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast brought to you by Huntworth. Huntworth gear for all types of weather, all types of terrain, all types of budgets is clothing that just works. Check them out at huntworthgear.com. I think they just finished up their winter closeout sale over there, but it's not too late. Like I was just telling somebody the other day, the Grayling hoodie with the Heat Boost vest is probably my go-to, like, number one all-season setup. That Grayling hoodie is incredible. So whether you're waiting for the next sale or just looking to get yourself something, that Grayling hoodie would be the place to start along with one of their vests. Just incredible pieces of gear. Hard to beat, really. And it was brought up that some of the prices on those compared to like the sales at Kuiu and stuff. When you really dig into it, the Heat Boost stuff is rated down below freezing and windproof, where some of that other stuff, when you get into those sales and things like that, aren't. So I just thought I'd throw that out there because I've seen that being compared. And it's not really an apples-to-apples comparison when you're looking at that kind of stuff. Also, from Latitude. So Latitude is closing out the Method 2 saddles on their website, $209.99. Use the code BHC, $178.50 for the regular Method 2. Incredible price. Looking at the Maverick as well, you'll get $30 off that, so $170 for an incredible saddle. We sold the heck out of those at the NRA show. Lots of people sitting in them, going around, trying all the other saddles, coming back, trying those on, and just, for the money, it's really hard to beat either one of those. I mean, you could argue that, Latitude's company was built on the Method and the Method 2, and just an extremely high-quality saddle for, nearly half the price of what it was. So get over there, check it out, get yourself one of those if you've been thinking about it before they're gone, because, like I say, they're coming out with the Method 3, a couple different changes there, but those Method 2s are an incredible value right now. Also, check out our other sponsors, friends, Canati, Zinger, Big Shot Targets. Big Shot Targets, you can save 10%. Use code BCP over there as well. And then Genesis 3D, he does have a Patreon code for members of the Patreon. Patreon is like crowdfunding for creators. Helps us out, helps us to be able to do a lot of the stuff we're getting into. We got to have this tack discussion. We are going to be at the Boyne tack. If you had been to any of the Boyne tacks before, we have the exact same condo that we've always had, right there on the walkway, right behind the practice range. Stop by and see us. I am sure that we will be cooking out on Saturday night, as we always do. Welcome to everybody. Come say hi, have a beverage with us, and just an incredible time to get together. And so we're getting into that, and it helps out with some of that stuff as well. So patreon.com/Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. And our friends, if you remember back to the Painted Arrow podcast, Nate gave us that code BHC15 for 15%, everything over there. They now have that new shot mag that they just launched. We got to see that at ATA. That is goes on your shotgun barrel, and you're able to film with your phone doing that. As turkey season's coming up, we saw some incredible duck hunting footage, just incredible with that. So definitely go check that out. BHC 15% off with BHC 15 at Painted Arrow. This podcast, friend of mine, Aaron Olsen, got to sit down and have a quick dinner with him at the NRA show last year, or the year before, perhaps. Just briefly, but follow along with what he's doing. 4 bucks, 4 states. That was his goal. He's still working on that, kind of like me, but puts out some incredible content. It has a really cool hunting journey. I think you guys are going to enjoy the podcast. As always, thanks for listening. All right, everybody, Adam back with another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. And today we're going to be talking with Aaron Olsen, Next Step Outdoors. And I actually had dinner with Aaron, I think it was last year, at the NRA show. And that was it. Like, then he flew out the next day. He was there helping out Latitude, and I was the replacement. So it was like strangers in the night. Didn't really get to talk too much with him, but reconnected with him this year, and going to talk about his story and kind of like what's going on with him. Another one of these guys who left a poor hunting state to pursue big bucks, and now all the things are falling into place for him. So how you doing today, Aaron?
I'm doing well, man. I appreciate you having me. Just excited to talk hunting.
Yeah, so your season just basically ended beginning of February, right? So Ohio's a little bit different, where you have a longer season.
Yeah, I mean, I just finally hung up the bow, and to be honest, I was pretty ready after starting at the end of August and basically hunting nonstop until then. But even at the end, I was trying to kill some does just for extra meat in the freezer, and I got my butt whooped. And here in Ohio, you can obviously bait. I don't do a ton of hunting over bait, but for doe hunting, why not? Just trying to get meat in the freezer, and I couldn't even do it. So, I don't think it's like shooting fish in a barrel like a lot of people say. It's not my style, but yeah, man, I got my butt kicked all the way through the end of the season here in Ohio.
So let's kind of go back to like the beginning of your story. Like, where did you grow up, and what was it like your hunting style from the outset?
Yeah, so I grew up in Traverse City, so it's Northwest Michigan for anybody not familiar. And there's actually some pretty good hunting opportunities in that area that I know about now. At the time, whenever that would have been 20 years ago now, Onyx wasn't really a thing. Mobile hunting wasn't really a thing. So I didn't have the access, even though the public land existed. I didn't know that I could hunt around where I grew up. But my family had a cabin 3 hours away on the east side of Michigan, and in a really tough area to hunt, like big cedar swamps, low deer densities, not great bucks, even if you are fortunate enough to get on them. And I think my first season, I don't know that I saw a single deer. It was right around the time there was like a huge tuberculosis outbreak over there, and the DNR basically wiped out what was the existing deer population. So yeah, first season, not a single deer. I honestly am not even sure why I continued to hunt, but something about the challenge and probably how hard it was for me is why I'm so passionate about it now, because I wasn't one of those guys that just grew up on a, really nice farm and every year since I was 12 years old went out there and shot a nice buck. Like, I really had to work for it. But, when I started, I had one single ladder stand. I would hunt it every single day, regardless of the wind direction, which is probably, one of the reasons why I didn't see any deer. But eventually that turned into, going to Menards at the end of the year, clearing out their tree stand section when they're on sale and starting to expand and have multiple stand options and different wind options. And eventually got into mobile hunting. And that was right around, I think, 2017. And I still hadn't even shot a buck. I didn't shoot a buck for my first, not good at mental math, 10 or 12 years of bow hunting. I shot a lot of does during that time, but it wasn't until 2017 timeframe where I really got into mobile hunting. That's when public land started to get a little more hype. And at that time, I was living in southern Michigan. And I was driving 4 hours north to this area of Michigan that was extremely hard to hunt. And the thing that did it for me was my best friend growing up. He shot what was the biggest buck we'd ever had on camera, biggest buck that had ever been killed out there. And I don't even think it broke 130. So not that scores everything, but I mean, just the outlier of all the outlier bucks wasn't even that impressive. But I was living in southern Michigan at the time. Finally decided, like, why am I driving 4 hours to hunt? Probably one of the worst places to hunt in the country. So that kind of opened up the public land thing for me, and haven't looked back since.
And so I want to get a little bit further into that, because it seems like, 2017, like, really starting like your own hunting journey, I would say. I think when we start hunting, we hunt like our fathers or our mentors or our dad or our uncle. And then you kind of come into your own and you say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. And whether that's influenced by social media, YouTube, whatever, podcasts, I mean, and it 100% is. And then when you start to see a little bit of success, or you see your buddy like, hey, oh my gosh, he did kill one. Like, how did he do that? And this is what social media is doing. 2017 isn't that long ago to essentially be starting, right? And so during that time, what was your occupation? How many days a field were you spending scouting, all that stuff?
Yeah, so that was right around the time where I got into the work. I played college basketball. So as a young adult, from 18 to 22, 99% of my time was consumed by school and basketball. So when I would bow hunt during those years, I might get like the day before Christmas to bow hunt. And then I'd drive back to my family's house 3 hours away. And then I'd be right back down at school doing 2-a-days while, nobody was on campus. But when I really started to dive into the public land thing and had some resources and some time, because I wasn't so committed to other things, I was just getting into like a sales career. I was actually an IT recruiter. So you hear like the term headhunter. Basically people would reach out to me and have me find these super technical people, and I would get them hired into, like Ford Motor Company was one of my biggest clients at that time. But I mean, I still was making like zero money, didn't have a ton of time off. So I had some more resources, a little bit more time than, I had while I was in college. But it started with really probably taking 1 week of PTO during the rut. And, I'd still go up. That was when I was still going to northern Michigan and still struggled. Like, I never killed a buck up. I still, to this day, I mean, I kind of stopped hunting up there, but I've never killed a buck up there. And then, that basically, I think it was 2018 was the first year that instead of just taking a week in the rut off, started to look at how I could maximize my season or hunt more. And that turned into looking at some of the states that open up in September. And Michigan season opens October 1st and runs through the end of the year. So I figured, hey, maybe I can start extending my season a little bit longer, get a good trip in, maybe in a state that has better opportunity than where I was at in Michigan at the time. And so our very first trip, we went to Missouri, me and my best friend growing up. And it was kind of cool to go through this progression with him. And since then, we've we're still really close, but our lifestyles are completely different. And we've kind of taken different hunting styles, but we're both successful in what we do. But it all kind of started with going on this first out of state trip to Missouri. And their season I don't know if it's every year, but at the time it was September 15th. Kind of assumed that, for one, it's not Michigan, so it's going to be easy, which I've learned time and time again is never the case. But we went out there thinking that, we're going to go in this really nice place that we had scouted and shed hunting, which was also like our first time ever, like taking the initiative of proactively going out and scouting a place ahead of time. And this area was like a lot of mixed ag. We found quite a few pretty good sheds, and we thought we'd just be able to go climb a tree, watch over all the bean fields, watch a shooter buck come out, and then adjust and go and kill them. Well, first night we get out there, neither of us saw a single deer, and we're like, oh boy, we're in trouble. The beans were starting to turn yellow. They're kind of in that in between where the deer really aren't hitting them, and it was just raining acorns everywhere. So we got our butts kicked on that trip. My buddy ended up killing like a 2.5-year-old buck, but that was like kind of what got the wheels turning and kind of kicked things into motion as far as this out of state hunting and like really starting to dive in some of that stuff.
And so then from there, you've got this job. It didn't sound like you're too excited about it. How do you end up doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, right around that time, it was right around that same time. There was like, it was probably around the time the hunting public started and some of these other groups that I was really paying attention to. Midwest Whitetail and Growing Deer were kind of the two channels that I plugged into a lot. But I don't know, I was living in the Metro Detroit area in a place, I couldn't even shoot my bow at my house. All the houses are house driveway just big enough for a single car, and you can get out of your car and basically touch the neighbors. So not a great place for an outdoorsman to be. And anytime I was going to go hunting or go scouting, I was driving hour and a half just to get to somewhere that I could do that. So I kind of started this Next Step Outdoors as a way to scratch that itch while I was in the city. And also just wanted to document my progression as a bow hunter. I know there's a lot of people out there that want to have better results. They've been doing the same thing over and over and over, probably not happy with their results and don't really know where to start. Obviously, there's a lot more information out there now, but I figured, hey, if I'm learning this stuff, I might as well start sharing what I'm doing, what I'm learning, in hopes to help other people kind of shorten the learning curve as well.
So it's interesting that you said that you were a college athlete, because it seems like a lot of like adult onset hunters or even guys who have continued success, they seem to be guys that come from a very like disciplined background like that. Like, and I feel like, whether it be like a military background or, high level sports, it seems to be even like martial arts. It seems to be like a correlation between like hard work or even just like persistence. Like you do this, you're talking about like 2 a days when nobody else is on campus, like putting in the work ahead of time to do this. Do you think that there's a relationship there between like your, I guess I would say like steep success curve to that history in your past, like the work ethic, that sort of stuff that was instilled with sports?
Definitely. And I guess let me start, like, I don't feel like I'm an adult onset hunter. Like I started bow hunting when I was 12 years old. I just really sucked for a really long time. And combine that with not being in a great area, just compounded the issue. But I definitely think that there is a correlation. I think as an athlete or some of the other things you mentioned, it's kind of instilled in you to have this end result in mind. And then you have this year-round plan of action to get you to where you want to be. So, for instance, in high school, I played basketball, and that was the only sport I played. I was athletic enough to go play at a, D2 school and very competitive level of basketball. So, I have some, God-given gifts with athleticism and height and things like that. So I probably could have played other sports at a decent level, but instead I decided to only play basketball. And I think since then there's been studies done that multi-sport athletes might end up being better. But I figured if I'm training basketball all year round and somebody's doing basketball and they're doing football, or doing whatever other baseball, I'm going to have a huge leg up because I am going to be a master of this one thing and they're kind of bouncing around and, more of, I don't want to say half-assing it, but, they're not dedicated to one thing. Well, I've kind of taken the same approach to deer hunting. And, as much as I would love to start getting into elk hunting, mule deer hunting, and some of these other things, I want to at least get to a certain level of proficiency with whitetail before I start deviating, because I'd rather be a master of one instead of being average at all of these things. And, but basically I've taken this idea that every year I set certain goals, and, they fluctuate and change throughout the last few years. But, I set these goals at the beginning of the year, and then I work all year round to set myself up for success to achieve those goals. And I think by doing so, just from a it's not just about shooting bigger deer, older deer, or more deer, or whatever. But for me, it's all about development and progression. I want to get better than I was last year. And if I'm working at this all year round, compared to somebody who starts, maybe end of August or beginning of September, and that's when they start their hunting process and they pick their bow up and, maybe start poking around, doing a little scouting. I just figure I'd be light years ahead of that person, if I focus at this year round. And that's kind of the thing that I've fallen in love with, is just this year round progression, year round. Like, I love scouting. I love shed hunting. And, as much as my wife would love to move somewhere warmer without winter and some of this cold weather, and I definitely would be on board with that some, but I really enjoy this period of no leaves on the trees, cold weather, nothing else to do than just to go tromp around in the woods. And I need that time to be able to figure things out and learn.
So then what does that look like for you, like, as you start out? So you said you, like, start this channel, you start to, you want to share, like, what you're learning and all this stuff. Like, what does that progression look like?
I will say, so there's basically been two things that have revolutionized the way I hunt. One of them is mobile hunting. So it was really like getting fine-tuned into the gear side of things. And it started with, I think my first one was like a Hawk Helium XL. It was like, I don't know, they were one of the first, other than Lone Wolf, to have a lighter tree stand. And then I got into the Lone Wolf Assault 2 and the Alpha, and kind of had a mix of these tree stands and stealth stripping them, and kind of figuring out how I can maximize the efficiency of setting up, tearing down, so I can get in close to where these deer are.
Friends of NRA is your chance to support our Second Amendment rights and preserve America's hunting traditions. Join Friends of NRA at one of our 600 exciting events nationwide. From games to auctions and exclusive firearms, Friends of NRA events are your chance to support a cause you care about while having a great time with patriots in your community. Whether you're a seasoned shooter, an avid hunter or outdoorsman, or passionate about freedom, there's a place for you within Friends of NRA. Visit friendsofnra.org to find an event near you. Stand up for freedom with the Friends of NRA.
Midway USA brand product designers have one straightforward goal: develop high-quality, technically sound products and deliver them to customers at reasonable prices. If you are immersed in the shooting sports industry and pay close attention to every single detail, you know our products are built right and stand up to everyday use. Who has shooting mats and range bag systems to hunting clothing and just about everything for the outdoors? Log on and shop 24/7 with super fast shipping. MidwayUSA.com.
Bedding, in the early season and setup. So that was one side of it. And then the other side was the scouting. And around that time, I really plugged in with the Hunting Beast and stuff Dan Infalt was doing, and was really fascinated with his hunting style. And where I was living in Michigan was, I don't know this for a fact because I've never been to Wisconsin where he was hunting, but big swamps, some mixed ag, and just everything he talked about was very applicable to where I lived in Michigan. So that turned into at least one day a week, at least until summer. I was out there scouting, walking through the marshes, busting through the cattails, trying to find these beds and just learn how these deer are using the landscape and build up a catalog of spots. And then once season came, I'd bounce around. And I didn't see success right away doing that, but I just learned a ton during that period of time where I was just out there to walk. And I I wasn't very efficient scouting, and I probably still am not. Like, I walked every inch of these places trying to figure out every rub and scrape and bed and trail and, kind of piece together the puzzle pieces. But it was really those two things. It was the scouting and the mobile hunting that kind of allowed me to continue to grow as a deer hunter and really start learning what woodsmanship truly is.
And so from that 2017 timeframe, like what was your first taste of success, or like when you felt like it all came together?
Well, I'm still not to that point, but no, the first, I guess the best way to think about it is you can read all these things or listen to things in a podcast or watch a YouTube video, and you kind of get these concepts in your head, but until you actually apply it and see things happen in real life, it doesn't quite hit home. And even this year, I had a lot of those instances, but just the mobile hunting thing. And, up to that point, it was, I would have my 3 or 4 set tree stands, and, I might bounce around depending on wind or what was showing up on camera, but I had these fixed tree stands. And if I sat there and saw a buck 100 yards away, I was going to be right back in that stand and crossing my fingers that he walked into bow range next time, and it never happened. So basically, by having the ability to observe something happen in the woods and then adjust was the next big thing for me. So it was actually my first buck. I got to be really good buddies with, he was one of my neighbors at the time. His grandma had some land, and, so we kind of hit it off and started scouting and running cameras and doing some of that. But I think it was November 5th. I think this was 2018. We had a rare east wind, and, we didn't have any preset stands for that wind because, west or southwest is the predominant wind in that area. So kind of went in the dark, did a blind hanging hunt. It was an area that, was familiar with, but I'd never hunted it. And sure enough, see a buck chasing a couple does around, grunted him in and, pinwheeled him and watched him go down in sight. And it was like, aha, like, here we go. I was able to go in, pick a spot on the map, go in, set up my tree stand, kill a buck, that sit, and tear my stuff down. And, I've been able to do that. I think I don't know that I've ever killed a buck out of a preset tree stand with a bow. I have done it with a gun, but all of the hunts that I've been successful have been hanging hunts of some sort, whether it's saddle or tree stand. They're not always the very first time I've sat up in that area, but it's amazing how by being mobile, you're able to put yourself into the right position more often than not.
Yeah, it just kind of makes me chuckle like during that when you said like in east wind, this buck right behind me, the one I killed in Kansas, same thing, like east wind, didn't have any spots, so just picked a spot where there was access from the west, and boom, comes together. So but for you, like I can tell you, like personally, like one situation in my mind where and I don't mean like all comes together like, oh, now I know everything, but like that cemented this idea of like not even necessarily just being mobile. Because I think maybe that was like the biggest shift for you. I mean, we always hunted out of climbers and stuff like that. So it was, we were always kind of bouncing around, but it was always just like hoping instead of hunting, and that's what I tried to like tell people is like, go out there with a purpose and don't stop until you find like what you're looking for. So you shoot that deer, and then what's next? Because like I'm just trying to like put together a timeline here from going from, never killing buck, and now you've, killed one off the ground, going, not necessarily off the ground, but go in there, see a buck, run him in, you have your first success. And, this year you set a goal, like I'm going to kill 4 bucks in 4 states, like in a very, like for most people. And I wasn't saying that you were an adult onset hunter. I'm just saying that people who like start to take it seriously like later in life, and a lot of those are adult onset hunters, they have a different like timetable or timeline because they tend to be like more focused on what they're doing. And going from that to say, okay, well, I'm going to kill these 4 bucks in 4 states is a very like truncated timeline, right? I mean, I've been hunting forever and I've still not done that. Like this year, my goal was to kill 3 bucks. I killed 2 and I thought I was like, that was great, you know? So, what's next for you? And then what's going on with like the YouTube, your channel, all this stuff as you're going through that transition?
Oh man, you're making me really think about a year by year. It was just, it was more just fine tuning my process, you know, scouting in the off season, fine tuning trail camera locations and learning specific areas. I think there's been certain seasons of my life where in my hunting journey where, you know, the first one was hunting northern Michigan, sitting in my ladder stand, you know, not really just more hunting a spot, you know, picking a tree stand and hunt that every time. Then the next portion of my hunting career was busting my butt on public land in Michigan, highly pressured area, out there scouting, running cameras, and I never shot a buck out there, but I got on some incredible deer. Like still some of the biggest bucks that I've ever got on camera were on public land in Michigan. So I went from, you know, hunting the same tree every time to, all right, now I'm mobile hunting. I'm scouting my butt off and really trying to learn what that looks like. And then from there, I ended up getting this permission with my buddy. Well, he ended up moving out to Utah and his grandma has 240 acres. I still go see her occasionally and she'll cook me dinner and whatever. And, you know, we have a really good relationship. I don't hunt up there nearly as much as I used to, but having a period of time where I kind of had this property to myself and it was the same property that I was hunting every year. I was still hunting other places and hunting public land and things like that, but I really focused in on one specific property where I could kind of build that year over year data and, you know, build off of my observations and really fine tune my approaches. And I think by doing that, I kind of went from the public land, bouncing around, hunting a different tree every single time, hunting a different area most times, to, okay, let me fine tune one specific property. And that allowed me to really build kind of a picture of like, you know, historic patterns of what these bucks are doing. You know, every year there'd be, you know, there's not a lot of mature bucks, but, you know, and sometimes those are just 3-year-olds. But all right, that 3-year-old did this thing. Well, the next year, a different 3-year-old did that same thing. Okay, why did he do that? And it really allowed me to kind of start figuring out these patterns of what bucks were doing on that specific property. And, you know, I had more success. I shot a few bucks out there. And then at a certain point, I started doing more of these out of state, right around, I guess through this whole process, I was doing at least one early season hunt and then eventually started to do multiple states in a year. But I was able to kind of take these patterns I was learning on this private land piece and dissect the reasons why these deer were doing certain things and then take that and try to duplicate it elsewhere. So I'll give you an example. One of my favorite setups on that private piece was it's kind of trying to think of the best way to you're kind of downwind, you're kind of flanking a doe bedding area. And these bucks come and, you know, scent check the downwind side of this whole area. And I figured out a way that I could position myself where as these bucks cruise by, you know, I'm able to get a shot at them. And now, you know, it's like, okay, that clicked in my head, like that setup works. So now while I'm scouting public land spots elsewhere, all across the country, and I see something that sets up similar to that, it's like, I bet I could hunt that. Bucks are going to be cruising downwind to that, you know, cutting perpendicular to the doe trails going into that bedding area, and I'm going to be able to get a shot. And I've been able to pull that off a few times now. And that's just one example. But by focusing on one specific property, I was able to really learn those patterns and apply them elsewhere. So that was kind of the next chapter of my hunting career. And then from there, now I've hunted 4 or 5 states, I think the last 3 years in a row. I hunted 5 this year, 5 last year, and I think 4 the year before. And that was right when I kind of started to build this channel to something substantial. This whole time I was building the channel and, you know, sharing what I was learning, sharing the gear tips that I had, you know, reviewing different products. And it started to gain traction through that process. And I had this goal. I've always been kind of entrepreneurial minded where I wanted to do this full time. I think a lot of people have that dream where they want to they want to be a full-time hunter. And, I don't know that that's ever a thing that you're a true full-time hunter. There's obviously some way that you have to generate money through that. And for me, it's more like marketing in a way, but marketing and sales. But at a certain point, I decided I want to do this full time. I think I got the ships close enough together that, I can make the jump and, not completely leave my wife out to dry. And, she was super supportive. And 2.5 years, I've had 2.5 seasons now of being like full time doing this. And that's obviously afforded me a lot of time to go different places and have the flexibility to travel. So now I don't focus so much on individual properties. I'm hunting a lot of different places, and honestly, it's been a good thing and a bad thing. It's kind of done me a disservice because I'm spread so thin that I'm not really keying in on specific areas and able to put those patterns together year after year. But again, it's all about development for me, and I kind of have this long-term vision where it's like I want to be the best bow hunter I can be, and I'm trying to make decisions that what's gonna serve me long term. So I did have a lease here in Ohio the last 3 years, and that was like my one consistent private land property. So it was kind of like what I'd always fall back on. I shot 2 really nice bucks out there, not this year, but the year before and the year before that. And this year I decided I'm letting that private piece go because it was taking up too much of my resources, too much of my time, and kind of hindering my development as a deer hunter because, the trail cameras went in the same spots every year, and I kind of had these trees figured out, and I wasn't enjoying the process as much. I wasn't having fun. So I'm out on that now and doing 100% public land this year.
It's funny. I had a similar situation. There was a property that I had always hunted, and it's a weird draw public land, but you get sections and whatnot. And the last couple of years that I had hunted that, I really kind of keyed in on that, and it took away a lot of time, and it was like a crutch. It was like, oh well, I'll just go hunt there. There's going to be deer there. I'll figure it out. And I can totally see that. And I think that's, it's very interesting that you say that because I feel like there's a lot of people, and it's funny because there's a lot of my friends who I give a bunch of crap to who have great private land and they never go hunt public. But there's always, and they're successful, but it's like they're always like, well, if I've got these deer on private and somebody else is going to kill them, I got to go in there and do it. And they just, why would I leave deer to go find deer and things like that? But I think like you said, to actually learn and be better other than just like learning these certain properties, like taking that information and being able to apply it elsewhere. And I know that it's all just depending on like what you want to get out of it. But what I think is really great about this conversation is like, there's a lot of people who are or were in the situation where you are, where you started coming from this and saying, oh, I want to get better, but they just don't have that jump seems too wide. They don't, and it's not about going into the industry full time, but just like making that jump to like actually go out and scout and hunt public and kind of learn and understand these things. But I think the main thing that I would agree with that you said there is that you have to go out and apply it. You can't just listen, buy stuff, and then think that that's going to be like the end all be all.
Yeah, spot on. And I can give you another example of that even this past year. So, I'm well into my hunting journey. I don't like that people say hunting career, like, it kind of is a job for me, but for most people it's not. But, you hear about observation hunts all the time. And, basically it's been, I'm sure other people can relate to this too. You have a limited amount of time to hunt. So to sacrifice potentially killing a buck to sit back and observe and probably be out of the game, probably no chance you're going to kill a buck from that spot, but in hopes to like glass something up and observe a pattern that maybe you can act on. I've really struggled with that basically up until this year. So if I was going on an out of state trip and you got 7 days to hunt or whatever the time frame is. Like, I want to be in killing position as early as possible. So I wouldn't take the time to really sit back and see what's going on. And, I'd have a hunt where I don't see any deer, and now I'm no closer to the end goal of killing a buck because I just more like guessed and picked a spot on the map, and I scout my way in and some of those things. But this year I told myself I was going to sit back and just observe a lot more. And I did have the time to do that a little bit more. But even people like Andy May is somebody I really look up to in the hunting world, and he's all about glassing. A lot of the hunts that he's really successful on, and he's kind of built this reputation for killing bucks in 2 or 3 days. He goes to a place, and the first day he gets there, he's glassing and trying to locate a buck and then moving in on that. So this year I did, I went all over, but my last hunt that I went on, it was kind of a mixed stag area, and I showed up, I scouted all day, and then that evening picked the spot basically on the fields that had the most browse. It had just snowed, so I had some tracks, I could look at the tracks and see what fields had the most action. So I sat back in a place where I probably wasn't even going to be within a couple hundred yards of a deer, but I could see the 2 most browsed fields. So I sit there, and sure enough, I see, I think, 2 different bucks that I would be pumped to shoot at that point in the year on public land in a brand new state. And so that next night I made the adjustment where I thought I needed to be. Was still a little bit out of the game, but I was kind of close. So I sat there the third night too. So now I have 3 sits in this area where I'm just observing and kind of figuring out like visually what's going on. And I watched these bucks come out 2 of those nights right in the same area. And I went in there that 4th day, midday, and I stood in the middle of that field for probably a half hour. Like, I didn't want to get too close. I didn't quite know where these deer were bedding, but just trying to pick a tree that I could be in with the wind direction, one that I could, it's public land, so I can't go in there and, shave half of the tree branches off the tree. I had to find a spot where it was in the right area where I could shoot out of and not get winded. So sure enough, I go in there that 4th night based off of the observations from the last 3 nights and got a 30-yard shot at the buck I wanted to shoot, and ended up clipping a grapevine that I didn't see dangling down, and my arrow went flying 15 feet away from the deer. But it just like instilled in me this, okay, observation, adjustment, and how deadly that can be. And then just to take that a step further, I had seen a buck run across the road as I was driving out of one of those areas at night, like right after, I hunted till dark, got out, drove out, and saw a buck run across the road. And I was with a couple buddies, and they didn't have a place to hunt there. It was going to be their last night. And I said, hey, I saw this buck running across the road right here. I'm sure he was going to that field. Go hunt it and see what happens. So they hunted it, ended up seeing this beautiful 8-pointer, and they had to go home. So I, based off of their observation, I moved in, put myself in position to get a shot at that buck. I ended up missing him too. I had a rough end of the year. Just, it happened quick, misjudged yardage, and shot right under him. But again, it was observation, adjustment, and it's something you hear all the time, but until you really apply it and experience some of these things for yourself, it doesn't quite cement into your brain. So now next year, especially early season and late season, I hear people doing it in their rut a lot too. Just sit back and glass, like see what's happening. And then that way, when you actually do make a move, like you have a very high odds chance of, at least putting yourself in the right position instead of just guessing every time.
Yeah. And there's different levels to that with like people talk about stage hunting and stuff like that. And I had never, you kind of hit the nail on the head where you only have so much time. Like even if you're in your own home state, like time is always a factor. And then there is this like thing in the back of your head that says like, I'm running out of time. And it's funny. I did a podcast yesterday, and we were talking about like some of the guys that just are not affected by that, and you mentioned Andy May, like and another one who came up in conversation is like Johnny Stewart. Like these guys are just confident in killing deer, and they know that it only takes one day or whatever. So they're not worried about like finding deer or killing deer. They know what's going to happen. And I think as people progress, or if you haven't killed a whole lot of deer, or you don't have that confidence in yourself, like that's where that time crunch, and you're like, well, I need to be hunting. I can't just be sitting back and watching, because I only have so many days. And it's like, it only takes 30 seconds for the whole thing to change. And so when we get to that, like that time discussion, let's talk about like what you did this year and like going into that, because when we say like, oh, you only have so much time to hunt. Well, it seems like you were hunting for half of the year. So
Yeah, it feels like that. My wife is thankful that season's over for me for now. So, but yeah, I set a goal at the beginning of this year it was a stretch goal. I do have a lot of time, but I still have to run a business, and I have a son, and I have a house to maintain. So it's not like I can just be gone all the time. So still balancing a family. I decided that I wanted to set a goal of shooting 4 bucks in 4 states in 4 months. I called it the 4-for-4 tour. I think I'm going to do 4-for-4 tour season 2 this year. I was not sure if I wanted to do something similar. I'm just going to run with it and set the bar a little bit higher as far as the bucks I'm chasing, and also try to do it all on public land. So, spoiler alert, I only ended up punching 2 tags out of the 4, and I'm already setting the bars even higher. But that's part of it. Is I'm always trying to push myself and set these goals that are going to force a certain amount of work throughout the year to what's a saying, shoot for the stars, and even if you miss, you'll land on the moon, or something like that. Like, you set these super ambitious goals, and even if you fall short, you still make so much progress. And by not being successful in punching all those tags, I hunted a ton this year because I had tags to fill. And I was kind of doing the math about how much time I spent in the woods, and compared to how much I hunted even when I was like a very passionate deer hunter, but working at my corporate job, I probably got 5 years worth of experience in this one season because I spent so much time in the field. So obviously the end goal wasn't quite what I had hoped for, but the long-term vision, like all of that experience, is going to compound. And one of these seasons, I say, I pray every year that that's the season, but one of these seasons, it's all going to pay off, and everything's going to click, and I'm going to have one of those seasons that are just absolutely absurd because I've been putting so much time and compounding my skills and experience, and learning better spots, and just I'm going to be able to put myself in a really good position. So that was kind of the goal going into this year. Started with going out to North Dakota. They opened, I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just real quick. I want to start with the planning process, because it's like, you can't just say I want to hunt 4 states and like without a like legit plan in place to be like, okay, why, when, and like the how of it, right?
Yeah. So obviously I was going to hunt my home state of Ohio. Like I said, I had a lease the last couple of years, 65 acres. It's really, really tough to access. You kind of have to walk right through the middle of the property to even get into it. But I was still going to fine tune my approach out there. I can't really do much as far as food plots goes. There's more of like a mature timber, somewhat open, big river oxbow that I literally take a wheelbarrow filled with my lime and my fertilizer and, my seeds and a backpack sprayer. And I would hike in 3/4 of a mile with a wheelbarrow going through, rutted out, washed out areas to try to make these little food plots back there. And so that was going to be like kind of the staple at home. I did a ton of public land scouting here as well, more close to home. And where I'm at, it's not like a big buck county. There is some great deer, but they're more rare than some of the other areas in Ohio. And there's not a ton of public around me. And the public that there is, it is somewhat similar to what I hunted in Michigan, which was appealing because it's not starting at square one as far as figuring out how deer use it. It's kind of swampy, mixed ag area. So I spent a lot of time out there, and soaked a bunch of cameras. I didn't even end up hunting out there once, and I'll get to that. But my plan was, again, just to continue to build a arsenal of these spots that I could go to and have some idea of what's going on and pick away at them throughout the year. So Ohio was one, Pennsylvania was the other. And I liked Ohio because I'm kind of like Northeast Ohio. So Pennsylvania is not that far away. Within a couple hours, I could be in the woods hunting. And to take that a step further, I'd actually met a guy on my honeymoon in Jamaica 3 years ago. And I was getting coffee and he's like, "Hey, is your name Aaron?" I'm like, "Yeah." "Is your last name Olsen?" "Yeah." "From Next Step Outdoors." And at that time, my channel was a fraction of what it is today. So I was buzzing pretty good. I was like so pumped that I literally got recognized in Jamaica. Well, anyways, we stayed in touch and we've become good friends, and his family's got a little bit of property that there's some good deer, but they've really struggled to kill bucks out there. So we went out there, did some food plot work, and that's a property I only can really hunt the first couple of weeks of season, and then gets into like the family's time, and I don't want to encroach on that. So there was that. I did a lot of public land scouting in Pennsylvania as well, just to kind of have as many spots to I didn't know if I was going to start hunting there early season, and that's one that, since it's so close, I can bounce there I can hunt 2 or 3 days at a time and not be gone from home for too long. So I could pick away at that through the entire season was kind of my plan going in. And then the other 2 states that were on the list was North Dakota. North Dakota is one of those states that opens up really early in the year. And there's some different access rules, like you can hunt some unmarked private land and things like that. And I'd killed a buck out there the year before. And the group that I was going with is, I don't know if you know Alex Comstock and Whitetail DNA, but they've been hunting around there for forever. So I go out to there. We have a big deer camp. It's a lot of fun, but they kind of picked a different area than we were the year before. So was in a position where I could really like build off of the areas that I was in the year before. I kind of started from scratch, but that wasn't daunting or intimidating for me. I think it's a lot of fun to go into some of these areas that you just kind of show up and figure it out on the fly. I think it's something that really pushes you and stretches you as a deer hunter and kind of refines those woodsmanship skills. And so that was the plan. And I didn't have any, I planned on just staying there till I killed. And then the last one is I drew a Kansas tag, and that was same thing as North Dakota in a way, because I was going to go there in the rut.
For almost 50 years, Midway USA has been America's go-to source for just about everything for shooting, hunting, and the outdoors. Go to midwayusa.com to see our latest deals and promotions and take advantage of our super fast same-day shipping. If you need a cooler, a new fishing rod, another rifle, ammo, or a reloading press, you can find it all at midwayusa.com. Thanks for your business.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
But brand new area, I'd never stepped foot in. It's far enough away that I didn't go out there and make any scouting trips ahead of time. So I was just going to show up and stay until I tagged out. It's the rut, it's Kansas. It's going to be incredible. It's going to be easy. And that was kind of the framework of what I was doing going into season. So basically 2 states that I could pick away all off season, scout, run trail cameras, and then 2 states that I was just going to hunt on the fly and kind of figure out, in the moment.
So what was I guess when I was watching these things, I'm thinking, like, what is the discussion with your wife? Because like when you were, I think it was in North Dakota, you're like, yeah, well, this is the 14th day. Like, this is, it was just like, oh my God, like, how do you plan for that and say like, all right, you got the kid, I'll see you in a month. Like,
yeah, well, first of all, she's incredible. Like I there's no way I could be doing this stuff if she wasn't on board. She's super supportive. She sees my long-term vision of what I'm doing as far as growing a business, and she really just believes in me and supports me. So that's the first thing. Like if you have, if your wife isn't as awesome, you're gonna have a harder time doing that. The other thing is, like, I've set my entire life up to be able to do this. So the reason we moved to Ohio, yes, it's better deer hunting, but we also moved to her hometown. So we're right by her parents, right by her sister. We have all of her high school friends, and a lot of them still live here. So basically she has that support here. So when I am gone, she's not on an island by herself. She can tap into get some help and support from these other people. So all of these things were intentionally done so that I could continue to do these trips even when we have kids. So, but that said, I am naive and don't expect it to take that long to kill a deer. So, like you alluded to, North Dakota, man, that was like the most I've ever, maybe aside from that very first trip to Missouri, I don't think I saw a single buck from a tree during daylight hours, and just really struggled. Like it was, it's super hot that time of the year, but deer generally are still moving decent. And I couldn't for the life of me find a buck and, get an arrow in them. Meanwhile, Alex's crew, I think they shot like 5 bucks in the first 3 days. So it was like watching these guys just stack them up, and I can't even find a buck to hunt. So eventually, and this was the first year of having a dedicated cameraman for majority of these hunts. So I'm paying this kid every day that we're out there, money going out of my pocket. And at a certain point, we had some other time commitments come up that, on day 15 or 14 or 16, we're like, all right, dude, we gotta call this, and, maybe come back at a different part of the season, or maybe I'll hit a different state to, hit that 4th tag. But that was a brutal way to start the season.
What does that do, like, to your mindset, right? So we talked about that, about like Andy May and Johnny Stewart and these guys who are like just saying like, it just takes time. You're here on the first leg of your 4 for 4 tour. You have this big giant goal, and you're like, I'm 2 weeks into my first state. Everybody else is killing bucks, and I can't even see one. Like, mentally, how do you bounce back from that, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I was still pretty confident going into the rest of my season. I wasn't sure if I was going to come back to North Dakota or what, but North Dakota can be really good late season too. So I figured, all right, I'll take care of business in these other 3 states and then make my way back there and, finish the job. But in Ohio, I didn't have, again, at my lease, where historically I've probably had at least 1 or 2 mature bucks to hunt right from the jump. I had 0 shooter bucks all summer, and I was out doing the Ohio private land thing. I was putting corn out, trying to desperately get some bucks going on. I had mineral out there and could not for the life of me get a buck out there. So coming out of that North Dakota trip, I wasn't concerned, but it's not like I had things just lined up ready to go. Pennsylvania, on the other hand, on the one private piece that I had, they did have some decent bucks. One was just a beautiful. He's probably right over 130, but just beautiful 8-point. And then there was a bunch of other bucks out there. So I thought Pennsylvania, I probably had a pretty good chance of shooting something early season. But Ohio was like a big question mark, because I didn't have. It's not like I was watching these bucks all summer long. As they grow their velvet antlers, and I'm glassing them in the bean fields every night. Like, there was none of that. So there was some concern, but I just assumed that, stick with it. The bucks will be in there at some point, and if I just run my program, I'll eventually get an opportunity.
So were you thinking, and kind of going back to that, I don't know, I guess like maybe the best way that I see it is like complacency. Like you had so many other things, like you had alluded to earlier, that you were like spread pretty thin because you were doing all of this stuff. You just kind of took that property for granted, and you said, there's going to be a deer there that's going to show up, so I don't have to really put in too much effort there in Ohio.
Yes and no. I mean, I definitely had faith that at some point there would be a good buck, but at the same time, I still was scouting public and running cameras on public. And I don't remember the exact dates, but I don't think I got my public land cameras up until, I think it was actually the day before the season opener. And I'd scouted a lot of spots in the winter, but didn't get back out there to run cameras, and life got in the way, and I just didn't get out there. But I figured, hey, might as well get these cameras up and soaking as soon as possible. So it was the day before the opener, and I was kind of, this is going to sound mean, but as I'm out there scouting, I'm walking the edge of these bean fields, looking for tracks and like accessing into the spots where I was going to run cameras. And I walked this on the one field. I think I walked in front of 4 or 5 cell cameras. And I'm like, these guys have probably been watching these velvet bucks all summer long. They're super pumped up, and some a-hole's going to go on there the day before the season and blow it all up. So that was me. And anyway, so I got those cameras out there, and I had faith that those public land spots would start getting some action. I was pretty confident in those spots. So it's not that I was complacent having the private land spot. I did fully believe that I would have an opportunity out there at some point in the season. And then it was just going to take some time. A lot of times, locally at least, and I'm trying to mitigate this and cast a wide enough net that doesn't matter at any part of the year I have bucks located. But usually by like October 15th, I feel like bucks shift around a little bit and I'm able to like pick them up and really start hunting them. So I knew it was going to be a slow start to the season and figured, just keep working. And at some point in the next few weeks, I'll have some bucks show up that I can chase.
So you get home from North Dakota. What happens? What's next?
At that point, I think I was finishing up food plots and just trying to like maximize. I love everything. I see private land and public land as kind of like your offense and your defense. I see it like medieval times, like your defense, like you can kind of manipulate things. You have your castle and you can build a moat and build a drawbridge, and you can really kind of manipulate things to be in your favor as much as possible and influence the end result. And then your public land is more of your offense, where you're showing up and their deer are kind of doing their thing and you're trying to get in there and attack. So I love both sides of it. I love the habitat work of private land. And if I'm sure if I had some incredible private land access where I was able to do food plots more and hinge cut and do some of these things, I'd probably do that a lot more. But as much as I've tried to gain good access and I've taken some chances getting some of these leases over the years, I've never once had a place where it was just incredible. And, I always had bucks living on the property and I was able to do food plot. Like I've never had that. So, I do have 5 acres behind the house here and I always do food plots, and it's incredible. I get some really good bucks right behind my house, but it's 5 acres and they're really long, skinny lots, and basically guaranteed that if I shot a buck, it's not going to die on my property. And I don't have really any relationship with my neighbors, and they're all kind of the same 5 acre, 5 acre, 5 acre. So I just decided I'm not going to, if I do need to go, and in Ohio, you have to have written permission to track across somebody's property. So if I am going to go through the trouble of doing all that, it's going to be for a big buck, and no one else is going to hunt back there except for me. So I don't let my dad back there or anything. But I think I was just finishing up food plots and, changing batteries and cameras and kind of fine tuning things that way. Shooting the bow, just kind of the normal like preseason prep for most people that don't travel in September.
Yeah. So then what's the next hunt? Like when do you pick back up?
Yeah. So Ohio opened up. I don't have the exact dates. I think like the last Saturday in September. Again, I didn't have any deer located, but I figured, hey, I'll go sit a place that I can glass a little bit and maybe get eyes on a buck in like my neighbor's field or something like that. So I hunted the season opener in Ohio at my lease. It just poured rain the whole time, and I saw a couple of does, but that was kind of it. And then the next hunt, from there, basically decided that I got 0 bucks to chase on my public land spots or the private land spot that I have. So I'm going to just start diving into some new areas. So I think October 3rd or 4th, I mean, it was like, it's season now. It's not preseason. It's not postseason. Like it's season. I decided to start checking out some of the like hill country public land in Southern Ohio. And it's something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and I've hunted a little bit over the years, but I've just dabbled at it. And there's good deer, but it's kind of intimidating, just the size of the terrain and the steepness and the vastness, and then the technical nature of understanding how thermals work and how deer bed and some of that stuff. So I was always kind of intimidated by it, but it was something I wanted to do eventually. I just hadn't done it yet. But I basically figured, like, why wait? I got nothing to lose right now. I have $0 to hunt. So I started to dive into some of the hill country stuff. And the name of the game there was just finding, this is another thing you hear on podcasts and you hear people talk about, but like until you get out there and do some of this stuff and see success doing it, doesn't quite hit home. But really started trying to find like oak flats that were actively dropping. Acorns kind of drop at different times depending on species and whatnot. And so I was going into these places and finding like little pockets of white oaks that were just raining down, and I made mock scrapes at all these areas. I think on that first day, I think I put up 2 or 3 cameras, and then we hunted that evening, and we ended up seeing a couple bucks. One like pretty good, I think he was a 2-year-old and maybe a 3-year-old, but like right away, kind of like started building some confidence. Like went in here, saw a deer right away. Well, take just a couple days after that, I think on October 5th, Pennsylvania opened up. So I went out to my buddy's place, and it was just him and I bow hunting. And we had that big 8-point that we were both wanting to hunt. Since it's his property, this buck's been hitting the food plot in front of his stand every day. So naturally he gets dibs on the spot because I'm just a guest, and I'm grateful to even be out there. So and I just took we basically made 2 little food plots, and he bumped that buck accessing. It was bedded like right behind his tree. So he bumped him right out of the gates, and I ended up shooting, let's see if I can grab this thing. I ended up shooting this unicorn buck that night. He's got, I don't know if you can see that in the video, but this unicorn point is like, it's got his own pedicle and everything. It's not just part of the one. But I ended up shooting him, and he didn't go very far. And my buddy ended up having that big 8-point come back out, and he missed him at like 20 yards or something. It was like, should have been a slam dunk. So that was fun, got to celebrate shooting a buck. And I don't know that I've ever shot a buck like with somebody else, like, being able to kind of celebrate and hang out and have help. I've done everything alone basically up to this point in my adult life, at least. So that was October 5th. I think October 6th, drove home, dealt with it. And then either the 7th or the 8th, went back down to Southern Ohio and did a scouting day again. So, looking for hot acorn flats or oak flats, hung some more cameras. And that day I got pictures of a buck hitting one of my mock scrapes. He was a pretty nice buck. So Adrian and I, my cameraman, ended up going in there, and basically it was like kind of the ridge top is, people kind of get hung up. Like, do you hunt the bottom? Do you hunt the top? How do you access? It was dead calm. The leaves were super dry and crunchy, and there was 2 of us. So like a lot of opportunity to make noise, but we ended up accessing, getting in there and hearing bucks fighting, like sparring, like not too far away. And we kind of heard one loop around behind us. And then, half hour later, this beautiful buck ended up coming up the ridge to get to these acorns. I think he was probably going to hit that mock scrape. And I ended up shooting him at, I don't know, 25 or 30 yards. So like back-to-back sits, Pennsylvania and Ohio, like check the box. So on the mission to shoot 4 bucks in 4 states, all of a sudden it's October 9th and like 2 down. So even after the rough start in North Dakota, all of a sudden I'm halfway there, and I got the rest of October. I got some incredible rut hunting coming up, and then obviously late season. So I was feeling pretty good at that point.
So then again, like back to the scheduling thing. So you can't like schedule your success, right? Like, I'm going to kill one on this day, and then one on this day, and then one on this day. What was the next state, and like, what was the time frame? And like, because you had already killed 2 bucks, like, did that change at all? Did you consider like, maybe I'll go back to North Dakota on my way to the next state, or like, what's going through your head? Because like these are questions that like every normal weekend warrior, 1 week a year hunter like is going to have, because you don't have that luxury. And luxury is a term, you're quote unquote working. It's a blessing and a curse. You've got all this other stuff. And, I know personally, like from experience, even if you just kill 1 buck and then you got this stuff back, at your house, you're like, your family saying like, "Oh, do you really need to go hunting today?" Like, "Oh, you said you weren't going to go until now. Like, what's going on with that?" Like, so navigating all of that, you killed 2 bucks in essentially 2 sits. You're back on track for your 4 for 4, but like mentally, what does that do to you as far as like changing your plans or when you're going to go wherever you're going next?
Yeah, that was tricky because obviously Ohio, it was, even though I was driving a ways to get to where I ended up killing, like it's still my home state. And then Pennsylvania was on the roster because it was that next closest state. So I could hunt it without having to drive for 7 hours just to get somewhere. So, but basically both of my close spots are gone. And for Kansas, so Adrian, my cameraman, he ended up being there for that Ohio kill. And that was kind of spontaneous. That was just, hey, you're in town, let's go hunt and see what happens. Ended up killing. So that was incredible. But the next thing we had was that Kansas trip, the beginning of November. And that was like something that was scheduled. We had dates blocked off where Adrian was going to be with me for that whole hunt. And he had other hunts, he films for some TV shows and things. So he had other commitments up to that point. So as much as I would have loved to just go out to Kansas, I kind of had to wait because, my dad was coming as well. So we had Airbnb booked. I had Adrian booked. So all these things were kind of lined up that like, there's no point of going to Kansas early. So that was kind of off the table. And then North Dakota is like 19 hours from me to get to. So a lot of that time, that next period of time was just catching up on life stuff, cranking out some video work. And I did end up going down. Kentucky's got like an early muzzleloader season. It's like one weekend. I don't know, like I think it was like the 18th or 19th, something like that. So I went down, bombed down with some buddies that are local here, and they all have permission spots. I just went and hunted like freaking mountains and public land in eastern Kentucky. One of those guys ended up shooting a 162 on the last day of their early muzzleloader season, so that was cool. But I got my butt kicked and basically decided that eastern Kentucky is not really something I'm that interested in. Just wasn't something I was pumped up about. But otherwise, I don't think I hunted that whole time really up until that rut trip in November.
Okay. And so November comes along and you head to Kansas. What was your, like in your mind, what did that look like, like on your like vision board, like this is how many days I have, this is about what I think it's going to take, and then what was the reality of it?
So the plan going into Kansas, we were going to show up on November 1st, and I had an Airbnb booked for a week, and that was the time that my dad had to hunt. And then I was just going to stay probably at least another week if needed, but the goal, I didn't think I would need that long. I was in Iowa last year. I killed on day 10. So like I expected to have to work for it. It's never easy. That's the one thing on all of these trips that I've learned is just because it's not your home state and it might be one of these like good whitetail hunting states, it's always a grind. There's always different challenges. But basically had 1 week booked already. I didn't want to overcommit in case we did kill on day 2 or 3 or something like that, and then have 2 weeks of Airbnb booked. So we went out there, and the area, we're kind of like central Kansas, where there's still some of the more traditional like Midwest style, like river bottoms and mixed ag. And then if you go a little bit further west, it's more broken country. You can use the glass a little bit more, and probably would end up being on the ground in some type of stalking situation, which is more of what I wanted to get out of the experience. Whereas my dad wanted to just sit in a tree. He wasn't interested in crawling around in cattle pastures. And, I just picked an area that kind of accommodated both. So we get out there, poured rain the first bunch of days, but the very, very, very first sit, kind of had the spot in mind. Looking at the map, I kind of just guessed how the deer might move through this area. Go out there, pop up the decoy, and we ended up rattling in 2 pretty nice bucks the very first sit. So I could have easily shot both of them, but right from the jump, we're like, all right, dude, this is about to be absolutely incredible. And one of them, I think one was probably a 3-year-old, and the other one, he might have been like old. He was super gray in the face. He had like a huge frame. He was just like a 7-point though. His tines weren't that great, but when he kind of turned away, he just had these like giant hoops. But not something I was going to kill on the very first sit. I just watched this video today. This guy talking about, the whole don't 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 pass something on the first day that you cheat on the last day. And I don't agree with that. I'm there to get the entire experience. I'm there to, you know, set these lofty goals, and I adjust my expectations as the trip goes on. You know, if I'm 10 days into the trip and I haven't even seen a buck and I see a nice 3-year-old, like, I'm going to shoot him. Well, so after that first one, you know, we basically we'd pick a spot in the morning. Sometimes it was driving around in the car just trying to get eyes on something in some of those more open country settings. Sometimes it was hiking in and being in a place where we could see a long ways. But and then we would scout all day. We were just in the field as much as possible, whether it was glassing, scouting, hunting. And I can't remember the exact timeline of things, but after that, the first day where we had multiple buck encounters, the rain kind of let up, and all of a sudden there was just people everywhere. So it was like you were more just trying to find a place that there wasn't already a truck, and that we really struggled for like the first third of the trip, maybe after that first hunt, maybe even the first half of the trip. So, you know, all of a sudden the first week's gone by, my dad leaves, and we ended up finding a different place to stay. But, you know, I got Adrian out there with me. He's an awesome dude, super talented with the camera. But there's just times where like he's frustrated because he's trying to lay down footage of some bucks getting shot, and I'm frustrated because I'm paying this guy and we're not seeing deer. And, you know, it was a grind. But eventually we got into some pretty cool, we had a lot of cool experiences. And it's one of those things where in the moment, you just think about how hard it is. And it never seemed like we were building momentum and like getting closer and closer to figuring it out. It was just like every day was at square one and we were starting from scratch. But we started to like, we'd glass up a buck and then move in with the decoy and try to rattle them in. And, you know, there was times where I literally was sprinting across an open field with my profile decoy and like getting in range of bucks and, you know, not working out, but just like a lot of fun stuff that you don't really experience here in Ohio or Michigan or a lot of the, you know, states around here. But long story short, we struggled long enough where it was eventually gonna just have to come to an end. We were gonna have, like, he had other trips that he had already committed to being on, and, you know, I was gracious. I was grateful enough that he stuck around as long as he did, because again, we just kind of started with a week as the initial timeline, and then would take it day by day from there. But on day 14, I think it was going to be our last day. And we went back to the very first place we hunted where we rattled in those 2 bucks. Hadn't been able to get back there since, just because of wind direction and pressure. And the one day we did go in there another time, like, rabbit hunters were just blowing these areas up. We had, there was one hunt in the middle of the week that there was, we sat all day from, you know, the plan was to hunt dark to dark, and we got in there early, had some younger bucks come through in the morning and does and whatnot. And then, you know, you're kind of sitting the rest of the day hoping for a midday cruiser, but otherwise you're kind of expecting that evening movement to pick up and hopefully get a chance. Well, it's like 4 o'clock. So we've sat, you know, 90% of the day at this point. And all of a sudden, like, a half dozen beagles come running under us, barking and stuff, like, you know, they're rabbit hunting, and blew out all the beds and stuff. So that was super frustrating. And we ended up talking to those guys a couple days later, and they apologized, but still the damage was done, and we kind of wasted a hunt that way. But anyways, so the last day we went back to the first place we ever hunted, and it was morning hunt. And from the moment we got there, and keep in mind, like, we're not in a tree, there's not a lot of great cover. We're basically just sitting on the side of a grassy hill, and there's not that much cover in front of us. There's 2 guys, there's a lot of, you know, we got cameras and bows and all sorts of stuff. So we don't have a great setup. It's just like, that's where we needed to be. But from the second we get out there, we see a buck out there in the bean field kind of heading up the hill towards us. So I sneaked down to like the funneled area and stuck up my like 3D decoy. And it's basically just a big rut funnel. It's like there's connecting bedding areas, there's food, and, you know, we just kind of expected deer to be moving through there every which way. So we saw that one buck. He eventually comes, I don't know if he got spooked from maybe a hunter accessing from the other side, but he comes flying by, and I like mouth grunted and got him to stop at like 35 or 40 yards, but he was kind of like frontal, and most of his body, like from the neck down, was covered. But I grunted to get him to stop and gave him like a meh, and then he stopped for a second and then just booked it the other way. And then kind of as that was going on, we see this incredible buck out there in the field chasing a doe around. So, probably 10 or 15 minutes later, he chases that doe right up to kind of where we were. They were at like 90 yards, and is one of the biggest like mainframe eights I've ever seen. I would say that was the only buck that was like a really like kind of the reason you go to like a state like Kansas. Like he was the only real big buck we saw the whole trip. We saw a lot of good bucks, but he was the only real big one. But he kind of gets out to where we have a direct line of sight to him. The doe went away from us, and then I got my decoy there. So he's looking at the decoy. He's looking back where the doe went, and, kind of unsure. He'd take a couple steps towards the doe, and I'd grunt at him. And then he'd turn back to the decoy, take a few steps. And there was one point where he took like, I don't know, 8 or 9 steps towards the decoy. And I was like putting tension on the bowstring, like about to draw because it was going to happen. And he ended up following the doe after all. And, but I'd grunted and snort wheezed at him a couple times to get him pissed off to come in for a fight. So he leaves. I was sitting on my knees that entire time. And I don't know if it's because I'm so tall, but I have terrible circulation. Like I hate sitting on the ground because it's really uncomfortable. And I feel like my legs fall asleep super fast. So he got out of sight and I basically just tipped over backwards onto my back and my legs were completely numb. Like even if Adrian would have been like, "Hey dude, the buck's coming back," I wouldn't have been able to get up because I had zero feeling in my legs. So I laid there for a minute, and by the time I got feeling back and good to go, I kind of sat back up and I barely got sat back up, and Adrian looked past me and said, "Dude, there's another buck coming." So this buck comes flying in. He had heard me grunt and snort wheeze, and he was coming in to check it out. So he came in, saw the decoy, and I think he was at 35 yards, and I'm staring straight into the sun. So I got the full draw. I've as much effort as I put into everything else, there's still certain things you can't really replicate, like shooting a big buck. Like you can practice obviously, but I just like, I feel like I black out, and it's something that I'm really trying to work on. And it's something that it's another story, but anyways, I didn't stop him. I should have stopped. I basically missed this buck, shot right under him. And it should have been a pretty easy shot despite me staring straight into the sun. But 35 yards broadside, and so I ended up missing. So he trotted off and then went to go downwind of the decoy to see like what the heck that thing is. So he's coming actually even closer, but he's facing us like frontal. So he finally gets up to like 30 yards and sees us sitting in the grass because, again, we don't really have any cover. And I was waiting for him to like loop around and go head to head with the decoy. But he basically got the 30 yards, spots us, and he's like doing the whole head bob thing and looked like he was about to bolt. And I figured it's now or never. I got to try to get this bow back because he's gonna run away otherwise. So I ripped the bow back. He goes taking off. I stood up waiting to see if he would stop. He didn't. So I let down, and he continued to kind of circle around us to head into the cover. So I jump up and I take like 15 steps towards him, and he's at like 55 or 60 yards. I ranged him, get him to stop, get the full draw. Adrian gets the camera back on him, and I shot, and probably shouldn't have. Again, like poor decision making in the moment of truth, because
You found your person. Now let the Knot help you with everything else. The Knot connects you to the wedding inspo, vendors, venues, and planning tools you need to make your day totally you. Having helped plan 25 million weddings, we've got your back when it comes to every little detail like RSVPs, budgets, and more. Because your wedding comes to life with the connections that matter the most. Get started at theknot.com/audio. The Knot. Let's plan your wedding together.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During tax season, your personal info travels to a lot of places. Between payroll, your tax consultant, and the IRS. If your W-2 gets exposed, that's just the ticket for identity thieves. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it guaranteed or your money back. Don't let identity thieves take you for a ride. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
it's hard to replicate that level of excitement on day 14 of getting my butt kicked. And it was a long shot on an alert deer. So arrow goes pretty much where it needed to go, but the deer moved like an entire deer length in that amount of time because he was alert looking at me while I was shooting. So anyways, I ended up hitting him like above the back hindquarters. So it ended up being high and way back. But, we watched him run off and was able to glass him for a little bit before he disappeared. And, um, you know, immediately, like, we were pumped up that we got an arrow in him. Like, you never know what could happen. Like, there's a lot of places you can hit a deer and kill them, but they're also incredibly resilient and super tough animals. So we were excited, but also like, I don't want to celebrate. I'm not getting excited. Like, that was not a good hit. So we glassed that area as long as we could, eventually lost sight of him and backed out of there. But we didn't go look for blood or any of that stuff just because we didn't know if there was a visual, like we didn't want to bump him. If he was going to bed down, the best thing to do is let him die in their first bed. If you get in there, start bumping them around and they get up and move beds and, they can travel a lot of, they have that desire to live. And so anyways, we backed out of there. I had reached out to a couple dog trackers just in case. Like I was just going to be as conservative as I can and do everything by the book. So I ended up getting a dog tracker. Didn't have the best. It was the first time I've ever used a dog. Did not have a great experience. He kind of dicked us around and wouldn't give us a clear timeline as far as when he would be able to help us. And eventually, so that was like first thing in the morning that we shot him. Didn't end up getting him out there until like well after dark, which is fine because I assume this dog would be able to take us right to the deer basically and either confirm that, hey, the deer's still alive or the deer's dead. Well, the dog got out there, never once got on the track at all. And he basically I don't know enough about this to say he was right or wrong, but he basically said, since the dog could not pick up any of that, the interdigital gland, I think is what they're actually smelling. When a deer gets injured, they release some scent and they're basically like between their toes and their hoof. And that's what the deer is tracking. They're not tracking blood, but the dog never picked up that smell. So he said, well, since the dog can't smell it, the deer's going to live. But meanwhile, Adrian and I are like blood. And we followed blood for like a quarter mile. Eventually it was good enough blood that we weren't really having to walk that slow, but it wasn't good enough to feel confident. And we did end up like calling the search, but the dog was like not helpful at all. And the guy, like if I was a dog tracker and my dog was struggling, but there was blood, I would be helping find blood. He didn't. He just basically wanted me to pay him so he could leave. And I was pretty frustrated at that point, just to like add insult to injury. But anyways, so didn't end up finding a deer. And kind of chalked up that he'd probably be chasing does that next day with a sore back. So that was a huge kick in the nuts. But overall, like looking back on it, we actually did have quite a few cool hunts out of that whole experience.
So what was it? In the video, it doesn't kind of go through anything like with your dad. Like what was his experience? Had you guys hunted Kansas before? And like what was the expectation? Because you guys got into some really cool stuff.
So last time we were there, we went to a completely different area of the state, and it was when I was still working my corporate job. So I basically had 1 week, and I got to full draw on one like really nice buck, and that was the only like mature buck that I had an encounter with. My dad, I think, saw like a 1.5-year-old 6-point, and that was the only buck he saw from a tree. So our first experience was not good. So we figured we'd try a completely different part of the state and hope to have some better action. And definitely had a better experience this time. My dad had I think he might have passed some good younger bucks, but I don't know that he saw any like real mature bucks. But part of the difference is like Adrian and I are younger. So like we were grinding, like if we weren't hunting or glassing, like we were hiking into spots and scouting and looking for sign and hiking into spots and setting up a decoy and rattling, trying to like pull something out of a bedding area. So we were just working our butts off to find better areas. And I think my dad was a little more okay with just picking a spot and sitting there and whatever happened. But he did end up getting into some deer and some decent bucks. And I think there might be one that he, in retrospect, might have wanted to shoot. But I would say overall didn't quite live up to the expectation. I think everybody thinks these states are just easy. You go to Kansas or you go to Iowa, there's 150s behind every tree, and we dealt with a incredible amount of pressure, like as much as anywhere, as much as southern Michigan during that, the first week and a half of November. So it's still, I mean, it's still a struggle. It's still a grind. You're going to have to work for it no matter what. Um, but it's one of those things where like it's a place where there are good deer. So like if you work hard enough and long enough, like you might get a chance at one of them. But it's definitely not, they're not everywhere. It's still a rare thing to encounter a good buck.
And so you said you were still hunting up until this past, beginning of the month, I guess, and you're hunting does, but you said you had missed a buck and some other things. So where was that at?
That I'm not going to tell you. Well, so we came back in the middle of November. I'm trying to remember if I did any hunting after that till a certain point. I did make a second trip out to Kansas for, I think, 9 days late season. I think it was it was like the week before Christmas. Got into some great opportunities. It was my first real taste at true late season hunting. I'm usually like messing around shooting does by that time of the year, but because I had the tag and the time, I went out there, and I mean, there was sits where I would see like 30 or 40 deer and, multiple shooter bucks, but it took me multiple days to find out where these deer were, and they were all just pooled into one big cornfield, to be honest. Like they weren't really like, it wasn't as simple as just going and hunting any cornfield. It was like they were all in this one spot, but it made it really tricky because how do you get within, with a gun, it would have been a slam dunk, but how do you get within bow range of one of these target bucks when there's 40 deer coming out in all different areas? How do you do that without getting winded? So I passed a couple pretty good bucks in hopes to get one of the bigger ones that I'd seen. And, I didn't end up shooting one. The last day I was extremely confident in my last sit, and some dude slid in, got there super early and like slid into my spot basically, which is fine. It's public land, but I was more than bummed out, to say the least. So again, I spent probably a month in Kansas and did not kill a buck. And that's, I don't think I'm a complete idiot. Like I think I'm a decently competent bow hunter and still, spent that much time in one of these in the whitetail mecca and didn't kill a buck. So again, just reiterating that it's not easy. I did make one more additional late season trip to a undisclosed state. And one thing I've decided for this next year is I'm basically starting from scratch. And one thing I have not done a good job of is kind of I have spread myself so thin. And every year I'm going to a new state and a new area and starting from zero. And I want to start building some year over year data and, invest time scouting specific areas that I can continue to go back to and just really over time fine tune spots. And so for that reason, and for the sake of the other people that hunt some of these areas, I'm going to be a little bit more conservative about like sharing what states I'm in, because, fact of the matter is with YouTube and everything else, like if you want to know bad enough where somebody's hunting, all it takes is like looking at some landmarks in their videos and, zeroing it in. But anyways, I went to a brand new state, a state I'd never bow hunted before, and just picked a WMA and camped there the whole time. I camped while I was in Kansas as well, when it was like getting down to like the teens at night. But this new state, that's where I kind of got in, did a bunch of scouting, ended up doing an observation hunt, and then that kind of like started the sequence of making adjustments and then eventually missing a buck. So that was cool to, again, go to a brand new area, which I need to stop doing, and just starting the process at zero, scouting, observation hunt, make the adjustment, get an opportunity. And that's probably an area that I'll end up going back to. But moving into this next season, I got to get my butt in gear. Again, bow hunting until the beginning of February takes, basically a month of scouting off of the table for me. But while I was at this other state I think I was there for 9 days. I was there for 9 days. Part of the reason for that hunt was to hunt. Obviously, my goal was to kill a buck, but more than that was to scout for 9 days, this time of year when there's no leaves, and basically try to determine if it's a place that's worthy of spending time next fall and in the future. So it was a scouting and hunting mission. But yeah, now it's time to get in gear, learn some new areas, and then if I find areas that have good deer and a healthy population of them, I want to continue to build around that.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because this came up on the podcast yesterday about goals. And, like I said, like my goal was to shoot $3, and I was saying this next year coming up, it's got to be the same because I didn't achieve it. But I said, that being said, I'm not going to shoot a spike on the last day just to say I killed $3, and I think that's pretty cool that, that was kind of like you're taking Kansas, where you're like, well, I'm not just going to shoot something, just to make content. You know what I mean? Just so I can say that I did it. Although I was like, I was a bit shaking my head when you didn't shoot that first buck that came in, because I was like, man, I don't know. I might have shot him on the first day and then hunted with my dad or something like that. And especially that one that you said was like super old, because that was a gnarly looking buck. He was weird looking, but like his nose was like super short and like his face was all messed up. Like it was a really cool buck. So, I mean, but hindsight always being 2020, you always look back and say that, but I'm more of
trust me, by day 8, I was like, was our best opportunity really on the very first sit? Should I have shot one of those bucks? And if I was still working my corporate job and knew that I only had, 7 days to hunt, maybe I would have, but I'm super blessed to be in the position I am. So I have a little bit more time, and I have enough confidence in myself now that I expect success. It obviously doesn't always work out that way, though.
Yeah. So going forward, like what does the rest of the year look like for you now leading up until next season? Because I think that's always that weird thing. And especially for you saying like, okay, well, I'm not going to kind of focus on elk hunting or anything like that. And there's turkey between now and then, but like for these guys who only do whitetail, like even some of the guys that are really serious about it, like there's some months in the spring to summer where it's like, if you're not doing food plots and stuff like that, there's not a whole lot going on.
Yeah. Right now is the best time of the year to scout. Everything's, all the leaves are down. I know a lot of areas in the north, there's a lot of snow where I'm at, and a lot of the areas that I hunt, I honestly wish we did have snow. We don't. I do like scouting in the snow, but basically right now you can go out in the woods, and if it's not covered up in a foot of snow, you can see where all the scrapes are. You can find the licking branches, see the rubs, find well-used beds, and really start fine-tuning areas. So that's kind of the next thing. And through that, I will find sheds. I don't typically like set out to exclusively find sheds. I'm more scouting, and that's just like a bonus when I pick up a shed. If I do find one and I think it's in a sheddy area, I'll spend a little extra time. But I need to get in gear, again, learning these new areas. And, I have different criteria that, I don't know. I basically think there's good deer in most states, and it's more of just a matter of putting in the time and learning an area. So as much as I'm going to keep the states I'm hunting a secret, I don't think there's anything that special about those specific states. So, some of them are proximity, some of them are where I have a place to stay, and it just makes sense to go to some of these areas. But for the foreseeable future, really until green up, I'm trying to balance, doing what I need to do to make a living and spending as much time walking new areas and trying to just figure it out. And a lot of the places that I scout, I won't come back until it's season. I'm just constantly trying to expand my, the areas that I have to hunt, and constantly trying to find that next best spot and build up a roster of areas that I feel good about. And, if you can build up a roster of, 5 really good looking early season spots and 5 really good rut funnels, and, kind of have some of these areas determined that, they'll be pretty solid going into season, you have options, and you can kind of flow that into, obviously there's adjustments you make during season, and I'm always scouting and changing things based off what's happening. But at this point in my hunting journey, I'm not like Jake Bush. I'm not trying to find one booner to chase for the next 3 years, and that's the only buck that I'm going to be like. I'm trying to find just like respectable, good bucks for a given area. My goal this next year is to kill 4 like Pope and Young or better caliber bucks, which is like, that's pretty good. Like I know a lot of people shoot bigger bucks, and but to do that on public land in 4 different states, I think, especially with a bow, I think is a worthy goal of chasing. And I think the hunter that I'll have to become in order to accomplish that is, that's the ultimate goal, because you kill a buck and you kill it, you're pumped for a day or two, and then it's always on to the next one, at least for me. So I kind of figured out it's not a goal of killing. The buck is not the trophy. It's more of, as like cliche as it is, it's like, it's who you become in the process. Like I'm trying to become somebody that can go to any state in the country, and you give me a week or 2 weeks or whatever, and like I'm going to pull a good buck out of there. Public land, private land, doesn't matter. Like I just want to be deadly in all situations. So I intentionally seek out hunting hunting different terrains than what I'm used to. So this next season, I'll probably be heavily into hill country. Again, kind of what our prior discussion was. It's something that's, I think there's a little bit of I know that there's not a little learning curve. It's a big learning curve to really get proficient hunting the hills, but there are good deer because of the physical and technical challenges that come along with that. So I'm intentionally picking states that have big hills, and my goal is to figure those out and kind of trial by fire, really fine tune myself, and hope in hopes that as I scout and learn specific areas, like here in Ohio, I'll be able to duplicate that elsewhere and replicate what works, and try to avoid what doesn't work in all these states, and hopefully they'll all be similar. But scouting it until green up is like, I'm already way behind. I feel like I'm sure I'll be fine, but all you can do is all you can do. But it has to be a priority year round, I think, if you want to like truly get good at this stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, man, I appreciate you taking the time and coming on here and chatting and kind of going through your season. So where can people follow along with what you're doing, and how can they get a hold of you if they got questions?
Yeah. All social media, it's Next Step Outdoors. My YouTube channel, like I'm posting educational stuff. I'm posting what I'm doing gear wise and sharing my hunts there. And then Instagram is where I'm most active aside from YouTube. And on that, I'm on my stories, I'm sharing like what I'm finding when I'm scouting, and sharing some of the behind the scenes stuff that, obviously doesn't get edited into a full length YouTube video. And I'm not a person that's hard to access. Like if you want to message me and talk hunting or have questions about gear or whatever, like I'm super happy to help. There's been a lot of people that have helped me along the way, and I'm happy to pass that along.
Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
A life that has the stories to back it. A life to be proud of. It's a Winchester life.
Yeah, baby. 6'8" Western. Oh, mule deer, baby, right there.
Tune in every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern on Waypoint TV.